I'm Michelle Shoemate, and this is the Sustained Collaboration Podcast, sponsored by the Sustained Collaboration Network. I'm a professor, consultant, and researcher who's dedicated her career to studying and improving collaboration among social impact leaders. As a result of this work, I'm convinced that collaboration is an underutilized tool for making a bigger difference in communities. On this podcast, I'll be highlighting insights from recent case study research on nonprofit collaboration, available at sustainedcollab.org. On this episode of the podcast, we're taking a look into a really interesting alliance called DVBeds. What I particularly appreciated about this story was the way that they centered the client. And this particular client are individuals experiencing domestic violence. And then as a group of organizations asked, what do they need in order to be able to enter into a safe, caring situation? And what they came up with was a really interesting shared collaborative system that allows them to use all of the available beds at this point across Texas and part of Oklahoma to meet the needs of individuals who have experienced domestic violence, so that they only have to tell their story once and they don't have to keep calling from shelter to shelter in order to find a safe place for them and their families to be able to reside. If you want to learn more about how you go about setting up an alliance of, at this particular time, nearly 40 organizations across an entire state that requires daily interaction, well, you just have to tune in for this one. Okay, so what I'd like you to do first is just to introduce yourself. And Paige, why don't you just start by introducing who you are and what your background is?
My name is Paige Flink, and I am the former CEO of 27 years at the Family Place. I've been dedicated to domestic violence for more than 34 years through volunteerism and then my previous work. And I am now still the champion for DVBeds as we try to grow it nationally, as well as an advocate for social justice and gardening.
Love that. I want to know more, but we'll try to stay on topic. Suzanne?
Hi, I'm Suzanne Smith. I am founder and CEO of Social Impact Architects. I also serve as an adjunct professor at Southern Methodist University and the University of Texas at Arlington.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for taking the time today. I've just really been captivated by the story of DVBeds since I first got a chance to talk with you all. So, Paige, maybe you can just help those people who don't know what DVBeds is, just learn a little bit more about it. How did it get started? Where did this idea come from? And what is it?
So these DVBeds was a solution to a problem that we were experiencing in Dallas County in Texas. Domestic violence shelters nationwide, really, but certainly in urban areas are so often full, and we don't know where there's available bed space. And so when a survivor calls an organization, if they don't have any space, then the hotline person answering the hotline, the advocate, says, here's a list. I'm so sorry, we can't help you. Here's a list of 10 shelters that you can call. And then that's after having talked to this survivor who has told their story. So they've already shared very intimate details of what's happened to them in their life. And they also could be in danger at that very moment when they're calling. So we realized that that was not the highest level of care for a domestic violence survivor. Then lay on top of that our Dallas Police Department decided to do this platform called lethality assessment protocol. And that is when a police officer goes into the home and meets a survivor there who's called 911 because of the violence they're experiencing. The police officer asks a series of 11 questions. And depending on the answer, if the officer determines this survivor could be a victim of homicide, we need to get this person to safety immediately, then the protocol is that the police officer calls the shelter. And so the Family Place and one of our other community partners, Genesis Women's Shelter, were the only two numbers on that sheet of 11 questions. So our hotline numbers spiked. And it also created stress for the hotline worker because they were trying to answer the phone and be helpful and knew that we were full and what were they going to do. But also you have a police officer who could be in a potentially lethal situation themselves because domestic violence calls are the most dangerous for a police officer. And you don't want to take a lot of time. So we realized we had to come up with something that would help these officers, that would help the survivor, and it would also help the organization place and meet their mission. And so we started out with a lot of different collaborations, which I'm sure Suzanne and I will talk about what we wanted to do, but where we ended up was with DVBeds. And that is a software platform, a cloud-based platform that gives real-time shelter availability. And so we grew our community partnership, but the idea is that the shelter every morning, the hotline worker that comes in or whoever comes in at 7 a.m. goes to see what space is available. They put that information in the platform, and then we start the day. And then you're able to do warm referrals. There's a lot of other technology processes that have smoothed and streamlined the efficiency of using technology to help solve a problem, but also it has helped give access to a survivor. Now that we've expanded to 30 programs in the state of Texas and one in Arkansas, some survivors didn't even know the family place existed, much less that they could go to Women in Need in Sherman, which was not that far away and might be a great place for them to go. So it's educational as well as access for survivors. And we're now almost 5 years that we've been in test or implementation mode.
Mm-hmm. And, when you originally came to this problem, one of the things that you did was reach out to the Better Together Fund, which is a pooled collaborative of funders who particularly fund this type of work, fund sustained collaborations in particular. And because you were able to receive that, you were able to hire Suzanne, who was able to come in and help you navigate some of this. And Suzanne, I wonder if you can just talk about, when did you first get involved in this project? And then what were some of the challenges that you immediately saw that they were going to have to overcome in order to really begin this essential program?
Yes. So I was thrilled to be part of the project, and we're very lucky in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that we have a fund like Better Together. And one of the more genius ideas of the Better Together Fund is, and I say this in my collaboration research, before you actually get married and you decide you're going to actually be in that collaboration, they want you to date for a while and say, is this really what you want? Kind of come together and actually try this. And so when Paige approached me, part of what we did is kind of a feasibility assessment and said, what actually is needed? So where is the current system falling short? And do all the partners at the table want to come together? And in what way would they want to come together to better solve for this problem? So the first thing we did is really look at that problem and say kind of what's going on at the 40,000 foot level. But we also really looked at the idea of, is this the right group to come around the table? And are they willing to take off their organizational hat and put on their community hat every time we're having this conversation? Since most of them are operating in their organizational context. So any collaborative solution, I often say, it can't just be about addition, it has to be about multiplication. Like people coming to the table, there has to be a multiplier. There has to be something significant that this allows the community to do as a result of coming together.
And Paige, you kind of alluded to this, but after that initial coming together, you had an initial idea of what you wanted to do, but that's not exactly how things turned out. So where did you have to make some concessions or make some different choices than you originally had planned?
Well, the pivot was, my original idea was we start with one phone number that everyone shares, and then we funnel the survivor out. You'd still have a platform, but you'd have the police officer, the first responder, the hospital worker has one phone number to call. And then based on availability, we would then place the caller would place the survivor in the right place, depending on the size of the family, or if she lived too close to this shelter, we need to move her to another shelter. And so the decision would be at the hotline level, but it would give the outside world and the caller so many more opportunities. And so that was not what people wanted to do. They felt like they wanted to control more of their intake, and they also wanted to be able to say how many hotline calls they answer. And so, we had to let that go. And then we moved to the second part of the phase of it, which we had already been trying to do together. I had the group trying to do a Google Doc when the very first Google Docs came out. So it didn't have had an address, but no one could remember the address. No one thought about it. There was always, it was too many steps and they had to look it all up. And so that was not good technology, but people a small group of us were already sharing information. But the biggest hurdle for this was being willing to share information. That is something that is a challenge in lots of nonprofits, but especially in ones that are every single one of our participating organizations has a board of directors and a different executive director and a different way that they're funded and a different philosophy or a different reason that they were founded to begin with. And so pulling all those people together was strategically challenging. And I had to put myself in the back seat, which is not my natural place to sit, so that Suzanne could sit in the front seat and drive the process. And it worked so much better because I would have been driving it down someone's throat, as opposed to Suzanne was so gracious in the way she collaboratively communicated and brought people along. So.
Yeah, and let me just speak to that a little bit. And I used the dating analogy before, but I think it's so important. Part of what I did very early on, and I think this is one mistake that a lot of collaborations make, is they instantly go to the collaborative setting and decide, how are we going to get together? And instead, what I did is I met with all of them individually. And I talked about, what are your current needs? What are the roadblocks? What are the pain points? I even asked them, just like you would when you have that first date with someone, I asked them the question of, what are your collaboration challenges? When has a collaboration gone bad? Just like you would say, when did a relationship go bad to someone you were dating? So I could understand, where is their trauma associated with collaboration? And so one of the things we found out, and I don't think Paige she knows this, is, the family place was the big dog in town. There was a power differential in the group. And so we had to make sure when we did finally get together in the room that everybody recognized, and we set ground rules, that everybody's voice mattered, everybody's voice was equal, that this was a collective solution. And they were always able to create a feedback loop back to me if they felt like that ever was not the case. So we did a lot of things, both formally and informally, to better understand their situation, to help whatever solution we came to be connected to their individual strategic plans, their individual boards, their individual needs, but also when we did get together to set ground rules and build trust as a group. And through that process, it felt as if they owned the solution. We call it the IKEA effect in research, that if you actually build something together, you actually value it a whole lot more. So even though Paige in her mind already kind of had a sense of what we were going to build, and that's a very important part, having some prototype going into it is helpful, but the fact that she was willing to let the process kind of take its course and the group to then come up with its own version of the prototype meant that even today, everybody who was involved, even though we've had people move in and out of those CEO roles, they're still committed to the process and still committed to the product. There's buy-in.
And one of the other tools that I remember you telling me about when we first talked that you used to help encourage that buy-in was taking folks on the customer journey. So can you tell me a little bit about what that technique looks like, and why was that so important for everyone to feel like they wanted to put the pieces of this together like you would a piece of IKEA furniture?
Yeah. So it goes back to this idea that even the person who is the most connected to the issue area, so Paige, you can tell how passionate she is. You sometimes forget that we're all there for the customer, and we forget what it's like to be in those customer shoes. And so what we did is we basically said, let's just forget about what's in your best interest as an organization. And we used a concept called design thinking, which is now used globally around how do you design something. And everybody from Procter & Gamble to nonprofits to global nonprofits are using this kind of concept of design thinking. And it really presents this question of how might we do something? And it starts first with customer journey work. So we literally walked people through Post-it note exercises of a person's going to call, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen. And very similar to what Paige talked about, we went through a normal process, but we also took kind of the process and said, how might we also prepare for other things? So it's no surprise in Texas, we have a lot of weather incidents. We have tornadoes, we have hurricanes, we have all sorts of things. So the thing we realized through that customer discovery process was this was also going to help us from a stability point of view. So if we did have a hurricane in Houston, or if there was a tornado and it impacted one of the DV shelters, we could immediately shift resources and people would still get taken care of. And so through that customer profiling and through those various scenarios we came up with, it allowed us to then pressure test what our process looked like. And then as we then looked at technology vendors, it was so easy for us to figure out what were we really looking for from a technology vendor. And so Paige already kind of identified that there were a lot of pain points with the existing thing that they were doing. And so we really needed to figure out, we needed to make it easy for the end user. So not only the customer associated with the person calling, but also the person who's sitting there answering the call. And so how do we make it so easy to use that it becomes the default? And then it also becomes a valuable tool for the organizations. And so that was really the goal all along the way. So we did a concept called design thinking and customer journey work.
One other thing we did that I think had value is I had found in New York City, Safe Horizon, which is the largest domestic violence provider in the United States. And they are in New York. There is one point of entry and it goes through Safe Horizon, and Safe Horizon manages it with back then it was a spreadsheet that was sort of similar to to a Google Doc in a way, but it was still a platform. And so we invited them. So the director of that program, I'd gone to New York and seen it. And then the director of that program, we flew them down thanks to, we had the money because of the collaboration funding. So they could talk about, we've already done this. 32 disparate organizations that serve religious only, that serve certain sectors of the population only, and to show that you can do this. There were 32 of them. There were 32 different groups, and they are doing it successfully. So I felt like having a user expert was also something that benefited the group, and they got to hear from this man who had been a large part of it. And that also, I think, enhanced their experience.
So I'd love to fast forward to today. So DVBeds started out with a small group of organizations in Dallas that Suzanne was kind of helping to facilitate the conversations. But in the last 5 years, it hasn't just stayed in Dallas, and it's transformed a lot. So I'd love to hear an update. Where is DVBeds today?
So where we are today is we have 30 shelters in the state of Texas and one in Arkansas that are actual service providers. And then we have 9 partners that serve the community and serve domestic violence or sexual assault or human trafficking, but they don't provide residential services. And so that platform is, that's where we are right now. We are working to expand it nationally. The numbers it really have increased. This past year, 2023, we had one other thing I forgot to mention is that it was a test for the pilot project for the National Domestic Violence Hotline. In October of 2020, they secured funding to find a platform like this. And so I called them and said, y'all don't waste your money on that. We have a platform, test our platform. So they went around and checked other places in the United States and didn't find as a cooperative group as we were, I should say, maybe. And others are doing it, but we were willing to redo our whole back, the APIs of the platforms so that they can see it. So the hotline, anyone who calls from Texas, they can tell them exactly where there is a bed. So this past year, 2023, had 163,000 unique logins to the platform that started out with 20. And the National Domestic Violence Hotline is the largest user of it. So I'm trying to pull together some data now for HHSC to show how we have shifted women around. I know anecdotally that the rural shelters have increased their capacity. They've served more people, which to them is also a financial benefit because they get paid by HHSC for how many nights of shelter they provide. So, but I don't have hard numbers on that. So we're trying to pull, because I'm just retired, I don't have everyone to tell, y'all go find this out for me right now. So, but we're working on it. And, but the idea is that we tackle Texas and then we really do expand it as an adjunct project underneath the national hotline. That's one of the things that we're looking and exploring is, can we bring them a funded program that makes the hotline better So we're trying to find national funders right now that will do that expansion and then convince the federal government to pick it up in 2 or 3 years once we get it built all out.
You've really seen such rapid growth, right? So you started just 5 years ago with a pilot project and a few organizations willing to build this with you. And now to be covering the entire state of Texas and going into Oklahoma and thinking about a national launch. It really is just an amazing story of rapid scale in some ways.
Our challenge is funding. And so right now, I can't speak about this at all without mentioning our technology platform partner who is doing so much of this pro bono, continuing to upgrade and change. And we've done, we're at probably version 3.0 now, because we've learned as we've gone along that we don't need to be as complicated. We need, to Suzanne's point, of keep it more simple. But they have been really terrific with us. But we're to do it, to scale it, it's going to take a significant investment on an annual basis. And so that's what we're limited. It's always the money.
I wonder if you have a favorite story you like to tell about how DVBeds has helped maybe an individual. Because sometimes when we get to the numbers of 160,000 logins, that seems abstract. That seems a little far away, but maybe there's a story that you tell. Of course, don't give away too many identifying details, but maybe there's a version of a story that you tell about how does this system make a difference for survivors?
It makes a difference. So one of the stories that one of our hotline workers at the family place likes to talk about is she had a client that needed to get somewhere, and the companion shelter had a client that they needed to move somewhere to bring them to Dallas, to get them away from there. And so they basically collaborated with the two survivors and traded clients, but it was good for all parties. And the people, and again, the survivors benefit the most because they are able to stay safe. One had been found, and that shelter needed to move them, and they had another one. And so that's as close as a client story as I would have to share. The other part is the boots on the ground, the people who do this work, that answer the phone every day. They feel so much better having an option. The self-care. I mean, if you have to tell someone no over and over and over again, you get where you don't want to answer the telephone. And so that part of it, and also breaking down the barriers of organizations that feel like they have to, this is my information and I have to keep it, and realizing it's okay to share that information. Because, and it's just one of the things we do not so well as nonprofit organizations, I think, is we're afraid to share. And so this way they're working together. So they've created favorite people that they'll call in Houston. They always know that this one down at the Houston Area Women's Center, she will always help figure it out. And if you can find a go-to person in other place, variety of places, that also helps the outcomes for the survivor too. And one other thing I want to point out that made this work is we have a transportation partner. And so there's an organization called Families to Freedom who will either provide bus transportation or have volunteers drive people, because that's the part that to make this work is you also have to, for people who aren't mobile, how are you going to get them 100 miles away? And so that's an element that we all as good service providers need to continue to figure out too. And so, it's a system that has so much potential, but it's gritty. It's not people want to say it's a reservation system and you just shoot an email to someone or send them a direct message and they're going to take that person and place them. Like, that's really not how it works. Tech people want to say that, but that's a human life on the phone. And so you've got to be sure that they can, if we're going to send them there, that they're going to be able to be helped. And so those things, because I've heard there's some other groups that are doing similarly, and we just reserve the bed. I'm like, it's not a hotel. This is not a hotel reservation system. This is super granular work. And if you go in thinking we can just do it with all tech, it's not going to be successful.
Yeah, that was we set ground rules as far as what success was going to look like from day one. And we said it had to be a warm handoff, because these individuals are maybe calling for the first time. They have a short period of time in which they can call where they feel safe. And we needed to make sure that that first phone call was very beneficial to them, that person had access to the technology, and that hopefully with very few exceptions, they're turning them over to the place that has the bed. And there is a person who's actually then transferring it, that call. So that was really the goal, is that, people were feeling like they were heard and were put on hold for very long. I mean, so that was what the customer journey work was all about, is us having very clear standards of how this was going to be. And so we've tried really very hard to keep with those standards.
Just the amazing transformation. To think about the scale of which you've operated, but also just the transformation of that customer journey from having to call shelter after shelter after shelter and being told no, 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 to the first place they call, the answer is yes, but maybe not here. Let me give a warm handoff to someone I know who can help you. And we can also provide the transportation and all the things that are necessary to help get you there. Like being able for the first time you call to get to a yes, I think is remarkable every single time.
I think what you just said is really important. Getting to a yes at the beginning makes everyone's blood pressure go down. It makes her fear go down. Just, yes, I can help you. As opposed to, I'm sorry, we don't have any space, being the first words out of your mouth. And so, if you've got the phone's ringing, and I understand, but still, it's just remembering the human that's on the other call. That's who we always try to make sure.
Yeah. I also think we're meeting them where they are. So there was lots of discussions around that. Every particular case has different needs, so does the mom need a crib, or the dad need a crib? Do they need a disability unit? And there's so many different things that oftentimes people need in order to feel comfortable, in order to feel like they can come. Some of them, as Paige knows, have pets, and they're trying to figure out, like, how do I get my pet taken care of? And so just knowing that we took into consideration everybody's not the same either. They're all coming with their own unique circumstances that's going to make them feel safe and comfortable to make this huge step in their lives. And so we took all of that under consideration. And so that was part of the conversation around making sure there was the right fit for each person who was calling.
The other expansion that, this is of course all driven by money, but my next phase of this as we go nationally is that it's not just emergency shelter, but what we wind up having is almost a one-stop shop for all services, all housing. So we have housing vouchers, you have transitional housing, you have hotels, you have short-term, or long-term housing shelters. Then do they need legal services? Do they need just transportation? Do they need someone to accompany them to court? So that we know what every single organization can do for them. And we do that on so that there's one depository that can see real time everything. The national hotline is close to it. They have a list of everything, but they don't know the depth of things necessarily. It's more like a piece of paper as opposed to, a true deep informational portal. And so Suzanne talked about the evacuations and, having hurricanes and tornadoes and stuff like that. There, as we expand, if you think about the coastline and places where there are disasters or there are forest fires or all those things, our federal government, again, is trying to find a place like this. So we're just on the precipice of it. If I just had some billionaire that would just say, okay, $3 million for 3 years in a row, that's all we need, then we can tie it in a bow and the federal government can pay $3 million a year. So
I love it. I love the idea and I love the passion you have for it. I wonder, as we kind of wrap up our conversation today, if you could offer a piece of advice to other organizations who are trying to put together a shared service network. Maybe they're thinking about it in housing, or they have another type of shared service where they're trying to track really the capacity of organizations to be able to meet the needs. What advice would you offer them?
I mean, for me, I had to leave my ego at the door, and also that trust everyone's intentions, that they all have it. At the end of the day, the customer is who's most important to them and how we get there. And so it's not easy a lot of times, but I think we just being able to trust each other, and our intentions are, we were founded to do this service and we're going to do it the best we can together. And being willing to work together it's easy to say, but it's not always easy to do.
I would say when you go into a collaboration, I always remind people that it's a kind of a higher purpose. So it's this ultimate view that it's we over me. And we are going to come together and build a system that actually works for the people that we're serving. So to Paige's point, you kind of have to, put your organization aside. You've got to really center yourself in the customer. You've got to connect to a higher purpose and kind of a spirit of co-opetition. Yes, so we are competitive, but we also are going to cooperate on a system that works. So to me, building that team spirit is really important. So during a lot of our meetings, we really built that team spirit. We also, brought in lots of different experts, as she mentioned, and got people connected to this higher purpose. Like, what if we were to create this thing, and how would it better help all of us to do our jobs? And so I think that would be what I would say is don't underestimate the work that you need to do to build the team. Because that teamwork is, I think, really part of the reason why we were successful is everybody walked out of there unified as a team. And I think there were probably many more future conversations around collaboration among the DV providers that were more successful because they had this positive experience around team. And us being one team in the community, even though we represent different organizations. And so I think that's really what Better Together allowed the group to do is in their own space, in their own time, with funding. So they didn't do this for free. Better Together helped pay for a lot that helped support this. And I think that just it liberated the ability for us to kind of think big, think differently, spend time with each other. And I would just say, make sure you're putting that level of intentionality into collaboration.
Thank you so much for being with me today. And thank you for sharing your story and all about DVBeds. I'm sure that people are similarly going to be as inspired as I have been in getting to know a little bit more about you.
Hope so. Happy to share more.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sustained Collaboration Podcast. The Sustained Collaboration Podcast is a joint venture between the Sustained Collaboration Network and the Network for Nonprofit and Social Impact at Northwestern University. You can learn more about the Sustained Collaboration Network and download the research referenced in this podcast at sustainedcollab.org.